My boy, my special boy, my one and only son, you made it. I could hear my father's voice at the edge of tears as he sat next to my bed as I lay recuperating. I was in some pain from my surgery and he had hardly moved from my bedside since it was completed. He had been worried about me since day one. I don't mean that as in the first day I was told I was to have surgery, mind you, but since the day I was born. See, on the day that I was born, my mother had died giving birth to me, leaving my father alone to raise me. And he did. He was a bit overprotective, but that's only because I had been born with a severe heart condition. In fact, my father had been told by the doctors that I wouldn't make it through my first night, but by some miracle, according to my father, I had pulled through. I was never expected to last very long though, and it was a surprise that I had even made it to my 13th birthday this year. All the while my father had been there helping me through my condition, watching me, providing for me, and protecting me. He had done more for me than I could have ever asked for, and he always told me stories about my mother. It's been long and difficult, hasn't it, son? My father asked, not really expecting a response. You've come a long way since you were born. You were always a fighter, you know? My father laughed slightly through his sobbing. I wish your mother were here now to see how far we've come, you and I. Naturally, when my father discovered my 1 month countdown, he defied the doctors and had me go through more testing. He wanted a second, a third, a fourth, and even a fifth opinion to try and find proof that I wasn't dying. Unfortunately for Dad, they had all agreed that I was on my last leg and the only option would be a heart transplant. This is a very difficult surgery to perform, one doctor had told him in a thick accent. For you see, it is hard enough to find a heart for a healthy man or woman about your age, Signor, but to find a child's heart about your son's is impossible. Pero I can still recommend him for the waiting list. However, the odds are not in his favor. This was devastating to my father. He had cried so many nights worried about me that month. He would take to dropping me off at my grandparents' and coming back hours later, having come from the bar as he smelled of booze and depression. I I didn't blame him for it. In fact, it was kind of comforting to see him worry so much, but I worried for him too. One night, he didn't come back until the next day, and he had a look that like he hadn't stopped crying at all. I asked him what had happened, and he just told me that he was visiting Mom's grave to ask her to ask her advice. He did that too from time to time, and he said he could almost hear her whisper to him there sometimes, and he comforted him. I didn't put much stock into it, but if it made him feel better, I wasn't going to throw it in his face. That same week, though, he had picked me up from school with an excited look on his face. I had been having an okay day. Most of the kids had left me alone and didn't talk to me most of the time while I was there. It almost felt like they thought I'd spread some disease to them. Needless to say, I wasn't sure why he was so darn happy, and it was a bit off-putting. "I've got great news, son," he roared triumphantly as I was walking to the car slowly. "Oh yeah? What's that?" I asked, not too interested in what my father had to say. "The doctor found one," he beamed at me widely. The way my father had stated this took some time to fully process what he meant by saying this until it finally clicked. "You mean," I asked nervously. "That's right, son. He found you a ticker to replace that. You're free and clear. Everything matches, and he said he can get you in by the end of the week at the very latest," my father explained cheerily. "But how will he pay for it, Dad?" I asked him worriedly. I had known the bills and visits had been expensive, and on my father's meager salary as a salesman at a local furniture store, and the days he had taken off to take me to my various appointments, I had been concerned that there would be no way for us to pay for such a major surgery. I was surprised to see him smiling even wider. "I've got that covered too, son. So no worries. You just hop in this truck and let your old man take care of the rest. You've got enough to think about with that new ticker of yours coming in." He ruffled my hair as I climbed in the trunk. The next few days flew past in a whirlwind of preparation and missed classes. My dad had taken over my dad had taken the rest of the week off just to be with me, and my grandparents had been there to give moral support to both of us as well. "Now, remember," my grandfather said jokingly, "if you see a big hairy creature while you're under, that's just your great grandmother stopping by to say hello, but don't go following her." This had made me laugh a great deal. However, it earned him an elbow to the rib from my less than pleased grandmother, who gave him the stink eye for the comment. The day my surgery was going to occur, I felt more nervous than I can remember ever being. I was worried that I was going to see tunnels and great Granny Hilda coming for me, but the doctors assured me that such worries were needless. By the time they administered the anesthesia, I was out like a light. The last words I heard were my father, who had kissed my forehead before they wheeled me to the operation room. "I love you, son. I'll see you in a bit." This was the most comforting thing I could hold on to as I was wheeled to the sanitized room. I awoke hours later after what only seemed like minutes. It was like that scene in Halo when Master Chief had woken up from cryosleep because everything was fuzzy. When I could crack my eyes, I spotted my father at my bedside praying the rosary fervently while holding my hand. He caught me looking after a few minutes, and then hugged me gingerly and told me to rest up, that he'd have the doctors check up on me. It had been 4 hours since I had woken, and Dad never even got up to use the restroom for fear of me slipping out of his sight. When he thought I was good and asleep, which I had been, I heard him talking to me. He told me about last night. He had gone to Mom's grave and how he had spent hours there waiting for an answer, praying to her and praying to God for a miracle. "I was there all night, son. I waited and waited and waited, but I didn't hear anything back. I was getting so worried. I cried all night. Finally, I was falling asleep, and I heard your mom's voice whispering to me, 'You need to help your son. she seemed to say. She said with a far-off voice. How though? How can I help my son? I'd give him my heart if I could, but I was afraid that would give out on you too. And you know what your mother whispered to me in the dark? My father again did not seem to be waiting for a reply, but seemed to have something on his mind. There are people, she said, that would do anything for their sons and daughters, things that people wouldn't dream of doing. But he's your only son. Don't you want to see him grow up? Don't you want him to have a family? She seemed to say to me, don't you think it's fair that your son, the son I died to give life to, gets the opportunity to live his life out? My father seemed to choke a bit as if holding back immense tears. You know what I said then, son? I said, of course I do, but I don't know how. And as I lay rocking back and forth in that cold, I could see a shadow was moving out there in the graveyard. I had cracked my eyes just barely enough to see him, tears streaming down his face as he continued without noticing me. As I, as I, as I saw it move around, he continued, I noticed that it was a small boy, roughly your age and height. Now your daddy never told you this, son, but sometimes when he goes to visit your mommy, he takes a cooler of beer with him so that he can relax with her and not get so scared out there. That's when it hit me. I know you'd be waiting for a heart to come in for a good while, but if we didn't find a heart soon, it'll be a lost cause. So I started to form a plan, you see. If I could just get a hold of a heart for you, all would be well. You'd be patched up and you'd be okay. I'd have my son back. I was starting to get scared now. I didn't open my eyes and I tried to keep my face calm as my father continued on. A sense of dread sat in my stomach like a giant rock as I listened more intently. So I took out the beers and sure enough there was enough ice just to make it to the hospital. Meanwhile, I saw the shadow of the boy running towards me from behind some of the graves. Now your old man always carries a knife with him at all times. They're damn handy and you never know when you'll need one, son. Remember that. Anyway, I followed the shadow boy to a nearby tomb and caught him unawares. I lay in my bed forcing my eyes not to squeeze or fly open, trying my best not to let out a yell as my father continued to tell me in gruesome detail how he had bashed in the boy's head with a nearby rock and slowly and carefully removed his heart and various other organs. The others he would put into the color as more donations to other children needing them. That's how, my father explained, he was able to afford my surgery and so quickly. I did it all for you, son, my father whispered. Now you can live your life without borrowed time. You can grow up and have a family. You can do whatever you want now. My father was rocking faster back and forth in the chair, but he spoke steadily as if to somehow make his actions seem sane in his own mind. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for my son, my father finally said, more calmly. There isn't a damn thing that I wouldn't do for you. And my father meant it, for the next morning on the news, a special report had been made. A young 13-year-old boy had been dragged to a local graveyard where he had been found beaten to death with a rock, only to have his organs harvested. The strangest thing was there were no clues to be found and no suspects. At least, none the police would know of.